Hello and welcome back to our podcast, Digitally Transformed. I am your host, Melissa. Let's get into it. So this week we're doing things a little bit differently. I'm going to share with you a recording from our very first monthly webinar. We plan to have webinars every single month as a way to connect with you and a way to just share and educate on current things that are happening in the industry. So this first webinar, we chatted all about cybersecurity, and I'm just going to go ahead and roll the recording from the webinar, and I hope you enjoy it. We're so excited to have you here. This is the first of many of our Infused Insider live webinars, and we plan to go in depth with you on various monthly topics. And we want to keep you updated with basically what's changed in the industry, current challenges, and what's coming next. And you may or may not know this. I'm assuming most of you do, but October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So we really, for this month's webinar, wanted to focus on cybersecurity. So today we're specifically going to dive into what has changed with the remote worker. We're going to talk about the differences between MDR, XDR, and EDR, and the role of AI from a cybersecurity standpoint. And then we're also going to leave some room at the end for questions. And as we go through the webinar, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and just add them in the chat, and I will present them or ask them at the end to our presenters. I also just wanted to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. And now I'm going to introduce my lovely co-hosts, who I'm sure so many of you already know. So we've got Jeffrey Wilhelm. He is the Chief Executive Officer here at Infused Innovations. We've got Philip Magnuszewski, who is the Chief Innovation Officer at Infused Innovations, and Mike Miller, who's our Senior Engineer here at Infused Innovations. So first, we are going to start with what has changed in the industry over the past year, which most of us know is the understanding of what work life looks like as it's morphed from that standard 9-to-5 working in the office that so many of us have experienced to a more hybrid or remote flexible framework, which really prioritizes employee value over time spent behind the computer. And we've seen a lot of exciting benefits from this new concept of work, but we've also seen that there's a lot of cybersecurity risk that has skyrocketed from that. So Jeff, I'm going to have you kick this off. Can you talk to us about why the remote worker comes with this added consequence of increased cybersecurity risk?
Sure. Thank you, Melissa. And yeah, so, the last year or two almost at this point, has sort of introduced a lot of organizations to a changed work model, right? We've sort of called this the year of modern work and security. It's because a lot of organizations have had to reconcile their organizational security model with how to be successful having staff remote, right? So, whether an organization had sort of planned in advance for staff to be sort of hybrid or remote, or whether COVID sort of accelerated that process or forced that process, all organizations have had to sort of try to understand where they fit and what their security model is around hybrid work. I think it's important to understand that there's obviously important elements of productivity that go into this sort of conversation. Of course, elements of security that go into the conversation. And there's sort of this gradient between those two, right? That it's really easy to have, or at least an organization to have the mindset of, well, productivity of our staff is the most important thing. But there's also that sort of rubber meets the road moment of, where do we fall trying to make people productive, but still enforce sort of modern security controls, right? I want somebody to be able to access this document from their couch or their kitchen table, but I also want to make sure that this intellectual property of my business is, protected or appropriately protected. And sort of where do you fall on that spectrum? And every organization's a little bit different. I mean, there isn't one, a one-size-fits-all answer, right? So an organization that has to be HIPAA compliant is obviously going to have some different controls than an organization that that doesn't, for example. But it doesn't mean there aren't minimum standards, so to speak, for any organization of any size. You want to sort of enforce proper controls around what a user can and can't do, what they might be able to do with your data, all that kind of stuff. So so sort of bring it back, really the last year or two have been around organizations finding their footing a little bit in that changing landscape. What's allowed, what's not, what is the impact, what's the user experience, what's the downside of this, and how do we sort of use this as a springboard for making the organization better, right? Better for the staff, better for our customers. Organizations that have embraced this changing model of modern work have been able to leverage it to say, all right, my staff can be effective and secure remotely. How do I then leverage that sort of improved workflow or improved automation or improved productivity or collaboration? How do I leverage that into something that's better? How do I springboard within my industry or amongst my sort of corporate peers? So I think it's presented a really interesting opportunity for a lot of organizations, once they've sort of reconciled with what does it mean for my organization. Phil, you and I have talked about this a lot. I think we've done some podcasts about it too with Melissa. And I know Stephen on our side did a podcast really recently with Melissa about sort of the new normal and changing work and, the great resignation and all the things we see in the media around this recently. But Phil, I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add sort of on how, you've seen organizations react to this. I know you work with some of our larger customers, and I don't know what your perspective is on it.
Yeah, I agree with a number of things that you'd said, that there's no one size fits all, right? Every organization is going to be a little bit different. Every organization has dealt with the pandemic differently as well. A lot of organizations have gone fully virtual. Some have a hybrid model as well, but some are in highly regulated industries, right? Which adds a whole nother layer of complexity to kind of what the requirements need to be around this. But I think, again, I don't think there's a one size fits all for any of this stuff. So, but I think understanding that there are frameworks for organizations to kind of build against or work themselves towards, whether that's NIST, whether that's HIPAA compliance, whether that's some other regulations or things as well, or building out what we commonly refer to as zero trust security model. I think having an idea about what you're aiming towards to better protect your organization as people have gone remote. We talk about remote, but we also talk about digital transformation, right? And the ingestion or the infusion of new technologies into organizations, right? That now I'm not just dealing with remote workers, but I'm dealing maybe with IoT devices that are now connected to the internet and on my network, and now I have to secure those things too as well. So not only has the environment grown complicated for working remotely, but there's just a lot more things to be aware and cognizant of.
Yeah, you touched on zero trust. I think that's important, and I'll maybe spend just 1 minute on it. But yeah, it's funny because so many organizations say I need to align myself to this regulatory framework, right? Because they're beholden to that, right? Legally, they have to do that. But there's a lot of organizations that don't operate in regulated spaces, and they sort of say, well, what about us? How do we make sure we're secure? How do we make sure our staff can work effectively and productively? But we don't want a data breach, right? It's bad for us. Just because we're not in a regulated industry doesn't mean we don't care about that. Right. And that's one of the things I really like about sort of the zero trust framework is, it sort of gives you this posture as an organization to say, like, the days of everybody going to the office and being behind a firewall and having antivirus on their computers, right? Those days do not exist anymore. They haven't really for a couple of years, but it's really become front and center with people working from anywhere, from home, from coffee shops, et cetera. So that zero trust model, I think, is really interesting because it effectively makes the firewall that I mentioned a minute ago, the user, the identity of the user, and the machine that the user is working in, and the data the user is accessing at that moment. So it's this real-time access, control model where you can sort of build these policies, conditional access rules, things like that basically challenge in real time, like, is this user in the place they are, on the device they're in, supposed to be accessing this? And does this make sense? Does this access make sense? Like, was the last time they used it 5 minutes ago and now they're 500 miles away? Like, how is that how is that feasible, right? This real-time risk model. The zero trust model that you mentioned is something that I find really a good place to start the conversation. Having accelerators around those so organizations can quickly adopt those, I think, is really important.
Sure.
Yeah, and along the topic of security and productivity, Mike, I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that. Can you be productive while also maintaining great security at the same time?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest hurdles that companies face. They always feel like if I lock this down, we're going to lose productivity. Our team's not going to be able to work. That's not necessarily the case anymore. I think, Microsoft has brought forward a lot of great tools that we can use and implement for organizations. They've got EDR, MDR, XDR, Sentinel, all these different things. And, kind of go into those a little bit. EDR is just your endpoint detection and response. It can be managed services. It can be, just a collection of technologies monitoring your devices. MDR, like I just mentioned, is your managed detection response. So it's a company leveraging EDR solutions and managing that for you as a client. But then you've got XDR, and XDR stands for cross-domain detection and response, not to be confused with like extended, which some people confuse it with every now and then. It's that cross-domain, and this is something that Microsoft has really brought to the table. I think Jeff sent me an article the other day where they're getting 8 trillion daily signals.
Wow.
With their XDR solution. So that's something that Microsoft has really come to the forefront for leveraging with their clients. In the past, some vendors used it for just endpoints and networks. They would say, hey, we've got an XDR solution, but it's endpoints and networks only. With Microsoft, you've got endpoints and networks, but you've also got those third-party software as a service application, the identity, documents, emails, applications. I mean, the list goes on. It can be your on-premise servers, VMs, IoT devices that Phil alluded to earlier. That list just goes on that Microsoft has built here, and it integrates from your SIEM, your network traffic analysis, EDR, intrusion detection systems, prevention systems, information protection, correlates all of these logs into that single pane of glass that everybody desires with the security solutions, but often they don't get. Microsoft has done that. They've given you this single pane of glass where you can truly have that cross-domain experience and investigate alerts in real time.
Mike, I'm gonna ask you a question. I know this is off the script a little bit, but I think that organizations are still, at least when we first have conversations, are still trying to figure out, EDR, XDR, MDR. I mean, is there a logical place to start? Should they go right for X? I mean, what would you kind of guide organizations to take a look at, and how do they kind of start somewhere and then move somewhere else?
I think you have to have an understanding of what your goal is. If your goal is simply, I want to protect my devices, I have all these other services in place, then maybe you start with EDR, and then you can slowly start filtering out all these third-party services that are managing identity or your data loss prevention policies, email security. It's understanding where you're at today, and the team here at Infused is really good at helping you understand that, and then knowing where you want to be, outlaying that plan, and then, like I said, you can start with EDR, but if you're ready and you have the licensing available, you have the enterprise mobility security licensing, you can start with XDR, and we'll help you every step of the way, and you'll get that single pane of glass that really helps you speed up not only your security response, but also your security automation.
Yeah, remember, XDR isn't a product, right? It's a collection of tools, right? So when somebody says XDR, there's still an endpoint agent, right, that's ingesting what's happening on the endpoint. There might be a connector that's telling your SIEM tool, like Sentinel, for example, that something's happening with your identity from Active Directory. There might be a tool that's ingesting data from Office 365, so when someone clicks a link or gets an attachment or whatever it might be. So it's not like you're choosing, oh, it's EDR or it's XDR. You're basically saying, where am I starting the protection of my environment? How comprehensively, to Mike's point, am I trying to be in this? And for any organization that uses email or chat or Word or Excel or PowerPoint, or has users accessing Salesforce or ADP or whatever it might be, like it just comes down to comprehensive collection of signals and telemetry, and then correlating those into a risk model for an organization. And again, different organizations have different risk models, right? It may be totally fine that your organization does something that another organization with some regulatory controls really can't do, and that's okay. But that sort of having the data ingested into a single pane of glass allows you to then get the most comprehensive picture of what's happening across your environment. And again, it's not just endpoints like Windows or Mac or Android or iOS, but it's third-party cloud applications. Like I use WebEx. Well, okay, I don't really know anyone who still uses WebEx. That's a bad example, but there's all these other third-party applications that organizations might use. And the thing I liked about Mike's point is it may very well be that you've already got tools like Duo or AuthAnvil or whatever that's doing this piece, or you have this other tool over here that's already solving some other problem for you. And that's okay. Like ingesting that data from those other tools into a single pane of glass is important, right? Making all those signals go into the same place is important because they can become actionable. But then you start being able to save money by saying, well, I'm already paying for the licensing to do all this stuff with what I'm already buying. Mike mentioned DMS E3, there's the E5 and E3 security SKUs, there's a whole bunch of other things. You might already be paying for all that stuff. So why not leverage it for ingestion? And then you can start saving money too. So again, totally separate conversation, but it's just sort of an important point of how EDR is effectively a piece of XDR. XDR just speaks to the broader protection.
Great. And Phil, do you have any thoughts on the different platforms and tools and what certain executives should try first or any of that?
I think I think Jeff hit on it pretty well. They're going to be organizations are going to be different points of maturity in their cybersecurity posture. So just I think taking an inventory of where they stand now and where they're looking to go will kind of help guide that process for them.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that it's important to know that every single organization is different. They're going to have different needs. They're going to need different tools. And so it's going to be a different journey for every company. So we've talked about holistic end-to-end cybersecurity solutions, which are extremely helpful for people, executives who are digitally transforming their organization or really just trying to have a better grip on security awareness. But I want to talk about one of the biggest areas of tech that is going to have a massive, massive impact in our lives in the coming future, and that is artificial intelligence. So, Phil, I'm going to have you take this one off. I want you to talk to me about the role that AI brings and what it's going to bring in the cybersecurity industry.
Yeah, no, it's huge, and it's been here for a while, right? This isn't something that's brand new. A lot of cybersecurity firms and technologies have been using AI and ML for a little bit of time now. What we're seeing now is just a more sophistication, robustness of these solutions nowadays. But to kind of set the stage in terms of why AI, why it's important, in particular to cybersecurity defense, is there's a number of things at play. As Jeff mentioned, there's remote work, right? So people are not sitting behind a firewall in a location anymore. They're working from home. They're working from Starbucks. They're at their cousin's house. They're wherever, right? So the ubiquity of computing has kind of occurred. There's an increase, especially during COVID, we saw it. Increased frequency and sophistication of cyber attacks. Not just on individuals. So when we talk about cyber attacks and what's going on in the industry, it's not Melissa's computer. I'm trying to get Melissa's files. And that's not exactly that's just a small piece of it, right? Colonial Pipeline was hacked, right? Disruption to the flow of critical infrastructure in the US. That's a big piece of what we're talking about here too. So there's the frequency and sophistication I talked about. The exponential growth of things attached to the network. I mentioned IoT before. I mentioned, SCADA systems. At utility companies, and there's just a lot that is now because of serviceability and wanting to do real-time monitoring and preventive maintenance and those kind of things as well. All that stuff's connected, and all that stuff has to be protected now, right? So there's a bigger surface area for attack. Signal explosion. I think it was. Mike had mentioned Microsoft is ingesting 8 trillion signals a day from all of the operating system data that's being collected, attacks against the cloud environment, authentications against Azure Active Directory. I mean, they have one of the largest footprints in the world. So the sheer volume of data coming in makes it nearly impossible for a person or group of people to kind of filter through and understand what's going on. So you have that going through. And then one of the biggest things, non-technically related, is there's still a huge cybersecurity skills gap. People have kind of forgotten about all of that. There are still millions of unfilled cybersecurity positions here in the US alone. So even if an organization says, you know what, I want to get serious about cybersecurity, I want to go hire 2 or 3 cybersecurity guys, it's not like the guys are just sitting around looking for a gig, right? And they're expensive and it requires a significant investment. So when you take a look at all of those things that I mentioned, there's tremendous value that AI kind of brings to the table in each of those particular categories. Jeff, do you want to talk about a little bit maybe about data collection and kind of what your views are on that and where AI is helping in that space?
Sure. Well, I'll also maybe start it with a quick comment on supply chain attacks, because I think that feeds into the conversation around data collection at scale. So for anyone who's on the phone and not familiar with a supply chain attack, it's when you go after, for example, a company that creates software that's used by 1,000 other companies or 10,000 other companies or whatever it might be, because you know that if you can disrupt the delivery of secure services from within that piece of software, you've now breached much more easily a much wider number of organizations. SolarWinds, for anyone who's familiar with that, is a good example of that, right? You get some malicious code or malicious update that SolarWinds, pushes out, or that companies pull from SolarWinds, and now you've got, your malicious code running inside, thousands of organizations that happen to use that product, right? And in fact, happen to use that product, and we're updating it effectively, right? Updating it from the vendor. So I think it's an important example of, it's when these attacks happen, you're talking about something that went from one point of compromise, one organization, SolarWinds, their update server, all the way pushed out to now 30,000 organizations or whatever it might be, now having all of this activity happening, right? And, threat actors trying to figure out what the top targets are to go after, all that kind of stuff. So when Phil talks about data collection at scale, and Mike uses the example of, say, 8 trillion signals a day, there is absolutely no way that a human could effectively look at 8 trillion signals a day. I mean, there's just no way. And the threat actors have amazing tools to make their jobs really effective, right? Doing network reconnaissance, probing for vulnerabilities, trying to find weak links in the environment, trying to send out, 1 billion spam emails a day to get one person to click, right? It's easy to do those things at scale. So if the bad guys, so to speak, if the bad guys are doing that stuff at scale, how do the good guys do that stuff at scale? And that's where machine learning comes in. It's about correlation of events, right? So you might see 10 really low risk alerts happening in your exchange online environment, right? Or you might see 10 low risk events happening against your identity infrastructure, or 20 low risk events happening against a file server or SharePoint or something like that. And individually, those might be somewhat meaningless, right? They might just feel like a bunch of low risk events. When you start to correlate that activity together and you start to see it's all coming from the same place, or it all has a similar risk signature, or it's this one account that just happens to be getting breach attempts against it all of a sudden, or whatever it might be. Correlating that stuff together, and that's why it's so important having all these signals ingesting into a single pane of glass, because you can do that sort of machine learning model against it. That's really important. The other reason machine learning is important is because, as we've said, every organization is different. So what's normal for one organization might be abnormal for another. So if you've trained a SOC, a security operations center, that might be monitoring 10,000 organizations. If you've trained them and they say, every time you see this, it's bad, and every time you see this, it's good, that may not be accurate for every organization of every type. So it's really about associating risk with the normalcy or the baseline for a given organization, and that's where machine learning models can come in.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was having a very similar conversation with Melissa earlier this week, and even beyond the organizational level. So if you have a solution like an XDR solution in place where you're looking at signals from different parts, right? Whether it's logins, whether it's device information, whether it's, you know, third-party information that you're kind of ingesting as part of that too. I now understand, though, now that the machine algorithm has learned, what does Melissa do on a day-to-day basis? Melissa lives in California. Melissa logs in typically around 7 a.m.
She's away, Phil.
Exactly. The social security number is, no, I'm just kidding. But all these things that are being logged that she does on a regular basis now gives us an idea of who Melissa is and what she does from a security perspective. So if all of a sudden, you know, Melissa, she's trying to log in from an IP in China, that's a flag. If Melissa is going somewhere within an Azure environment that she's not supposed to be trying to get into, we're going to see and be notified on those kind of things. So it allows us to, at an individual level now, to be able to see, okay, what's normal for an individual, and then be able to, you know, to kind of address that appropriately in an organization.
Yeah. Any following thoughts, Mike?
Something that Phil just alluded to, you know, your account bouncing from California to overseas, that does generate alerts for the SOC teams, and those alerts become very redundant, very exhausting, especially whenever it's flagging because your password was incorrect, right? That's something we see all the time. We see an alert come in for that. And, you know, something that Microsoft has with Sentinel, it's a SIEM, but it's also a SOAR. And with those SOAR capabilities within Sentinel, you can now automate those responses using AI and machine learning to say, okay, this password was incorrect. This is an alert that my SOC team needs to spend time looking into. Or, okay, this password was correct. I'm going to actually generate an alert. And now, you know, the human element needs to come into play and get investigated. And I think that's huge, because a lot of times with SOC teams, they'll just get overloaded with mundane alerts that are benign, that are false positives, and they're going to miss something. The human element, the human factor will come into play, and they're going to miss an alert, ignore something, and then all of a sudden you've got a compromised account because the SOC team, I don't want to say got lazy, they were just human. They saw the same alert 15 times. One of those was true, or saw it 500 times and one was true. So, you know, the SOAR capabilities there to automate the response is not only going to help you, but it's also going to help your SOC team stay on their toes.
And for that's great. That's a great point, Mike. And for any cybersecurity technology company that's worth its weight, the way AI works, right? There are training models that are built, and training models are only as good as the data that you're putting into it, right? The quantity, the volume, the cleanliness of that data, and the historical perspective of that data as well. So, you know, to Mike's point, where the correlation happens, the more data that you can kind of feed into the system to train it, so you're not getting false positives, so that everything that's kind of coming out of a SIEM solution or a source solution is legitimately a concern. And you want your team seeing, you don't want your team seeing thousands of alerts. You want your team seeing tens of alerts during the course of a day or a week. You want them focusing on the stuff that are really, or there are real threats within the organization. Jeff, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as well.
Well, actually, I mean, to follow up on what you and Mike were saying, the training of the model is really the important part, and it's individualized for different people within an organization or different tiers within in an organization, right? The C-suite or the people that work with financials or whatever, right? So there's these sort of, you know, bubbles of profiles, so to speak, and it's really interesting because, you know, when an automatic threat investigation is kicked off, you know, for example, on our side, on behalf of a customer, you know, we kick off a threat investigation. We actually have the ability at the end to say, this was a legitimate problem, this was a false positive, this was something we're remediating, and this is what we're doing. And that's really important because, to your point, it's sort of the referential, or it's the ability to sort of train the model as you go. And, you know, I noticed in the chat, you know, Stephen Kellogg gave a really good example of, you know, we've all seen this, right? Your credit card gets used somewhere that's sort of outside the norm, or the transaction size is larger than usual, or whatever it might be. Perfect example if it's outside your norm, right? And your norm is different than somebody else's norm. I know we're not answering questions in the chat necessarily, but Stevens is really relevant, I think, to this. And, he asked, how do small and mid-sized organizations actually keep pace with this? And machine learning is a big piece of that answer, because a small to mid-sized organization can't afford a SOC team that's going to be 24 hours a day, eyes on glass, effectively managing all the different tools within the environment. So, outsourcing SOC, building your environment against the standardized framework. Our accelerators, deliver a lot of the ZTSAs, the zero trust security services, in 6 to 8 weeks, really quick time to value. And to the question Stephen's asking, it's very much about get a good framework in place, get somebody who's monitoring it so you can focus on your business. And then machine learning escalates really the important correlated risks up for human intervention. Yeah.
Awesome. Are there any other questions related to the AI or ML in cybersecurity? If not, I have a couple.
It does look like Stephen Kellogg is in the process of giving one to us. So
I saw that. So we'll wait for you, Stephen. You can have consultants come in to help build a tech strategy. There are also excellent companies, MSP, though they need to be vetted. Not a question. Okay, Brendan's got a question. Are there a handful of fundamental principles that permeate throughout cybersecurity methods and applications?
Yeah, I'll take that one, and then I think Mike's probably got a pretty good, comment or two on it. But yeah, I mean, fundamentally, and I touched on this earlier, like there are sort of like minimum standards, right? There's also, and I don't want to call them maximum standards because I think that's really a bit, that's I'll maybe too hyperbolic, but effectively there is a point of diminishing return, or a point where, you might get a 1% incremental, protection improvement at the cost of 30% productivity, or an extra $1 million a year, or right, whatever it is. So there is definitely a point of diminishing return on the high end, and a point of, oh my gosh, you're not even doing the bare minimums on the bottom end, right? Yes, exactly. There is an ROI associated with security. There's an ROI associated with productivity, and there's that middle sort of gradient that I spoke about earlier. But yeah, the fundamental principles, there are things around, like if you're not doing multi-factor authentication, and zero trust sort of talks about a lot of this, right? Assume breach is sort of a fundamental principle of zero trust, and there's six of them, and we can throw a link in the chat to people who want to learn a little bit more about zero trust. We have a cybersecurity page on our website that goes into that quite a bit. Yeah, no, Brennan, it's a good question, and it's not just that there's fundamental principles, but that the methods and applications, as you mentioned, sort of support those fundamental principles. We talk about the Microsoft stack quite a bit, not because it's the only one out there. It isn't. There are XDR solutions out there from other vendors, but from a comprehensive sort of single pane of glass, we like it, because a lot of folks are using Active Directory on-prem. A lot of folks are using Windows 10 or Windows 11 machines. A lot of folks are using Office 365 or Exchange Online or Teams or SharePoint. So, the comprehensiveness of the coverage is good, and it's sort of all-inclusive from a cost and licensing perspective. So we sort of talk about that one quite a bit, but certainly not the only solution out there. The most important thing is getting all of your signals ingested into a place where they can be analyzed comprehensively, right, regardless of the tools that you're using. So, Mike, you have anything you want to add to Brennan's question, or did I touch on it?
I think you touched on it pretty well. I think, like you said, every organization is going to have their baseline of where they need to be. But like you said, MFA, patching, I can't ever find a reason to exclude patching, of not only your OS, but your applications as well. I mean, there's so many times that we see, for instance, those on-premise servers that you just mentioned, their applications on there, people ignore the updates for those, and that's one of the highest vulnerabilities on those servers. What was it, back in June that VMware came out with a 9.8 on the CVS scale for a security alert, and primarily that was at the server level. So a lot of people forget those, and you can't really let those things slide. And to the XDR point, as soon as you go inside of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint and you look at that server, you're going to see all of those vulnerabilities, and it's going to tell you what to patch, how to patch it, and give you the information as to why it's a threat. Yeah,
lateral movement is something that I think a lot of people sort of misunderstand, right? Lateral movement doesn't necessarily mean, I'm on Phil's computer and I'm a threat actor and I'm jumping to to Mike's, although certainly that would be bad. I'm not saying that's a good thing. But lateral movement is really about any sort of reconnaissance you can do to find the weakest point in the environment and try to exploit it, right? So every environment has a weakest point, right? I mean, it might be that you've done an awesome job. You still have a weak point somewhere, right? Every organization has one. And it's sort of trying to find, one, know about it as soon as possible. Two, get telemetry around an issue if it's happening in real time. Three, address it as quickly as you can. But four, just assume that you are going to get breached as an organization. There are zero-day vulnerabilities. You could patch everything the moment it comes out, and there will still be a zero-day vulnerability that impacts your environment that might not impact somebody else's. And I read a Verizon, I think it was a Verizon study that said a breached environment could have an attacker in it for, I think, 8 months undetected or something like that. I have to find the statistic, but it was something like that. And it's crazy because during 8 months, how much reconnaissance do you think they can do? 8 months? I mean, it's an incredible amount of reconnaissance, right? It's figuring out what accounts are privileged. It's figuring out what a normal course of action is for a user, who they communicate, what their signature looks like, and then try to impersonate them and all that kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot that goes into it, and getting telemetry from as many places as possible means being more comprehensive about how you can protect your environment from those things.
Yeah, absolutely. A question that we've gotten a couple times from some clients is, that while AI sounds like it is improving the ability to defend against these cyber attacks, aren't the AI models themselves a vector for an attack? So what does that look like, and what would that mean?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a valid concern, and it's something that we have to continue to watch closely, especially the technology companies that have built these algorithms out and are pulling in these data. There's a concept called data poisoning that is out there, and it's really if a threat actor can figure out who owns the algorithm and understand kind of how it works, that there is the ability to feed it false information, right? And that's something that needs to be concerned, and it's important. It becomes an important governance policy with, how do you maintain integrity of those signals and data coming in? How do you maintain the integrity of your algorithm that you've built as well? So absolutely, the bad guys are going to be using that. They're using these technologies just as much as we are on a defensive side of things as well. I would say also, as an example of kind of what they're doing with it too. I mean, if you look at the concepts of phishing and spear phishing, right? So historically, they send them to blast out emails, and some of them, it's kind of like spaghetti against the wall, right? Some of it works, some of it doesn't. And they try to tweak the message and kind of see what's going to get the best results. The fact now, they could act like a marketer, right? Where I can go out and I can send billions of emails or millions of emails out. I can see what's working in real time and tweak the message, right? And resend things out. I know that maybe there's a current event in politics or in government or something that's of interest to people that I know if I tweak the message this way, my open rate or click rate goes from 1% to 10%. Yes. So they're using this just as much on the attack front as we're trying to use it on the back end to kind of defend it. And Jeff, I'm sure you have some thoughts on that as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, the marketing aspect is always interesting because, yes, the same tactics that you would use to have an effective marketing campaign are the same tactics you might use to breach an organization. But even ignoring those for a second, there's also legitimate places in an organization that are just ripe vectors for attack. I mean, think about what a human resources manager might do as a normal course of action in their day-to-day job, right? They put out a job description, a role description, and what do they get? They get 500 emails from people who are interested in that job. And what are attached to those emails? Documents, right? And the HR department, literally their job is to vet these resumes so they can hire people. They're doing their job. It's not even like it was somebody accidentally clicking a link or accidentally opening a file and then realizing, oh, shoot, I made a mistake. It's literally their job, and a 0 day or some threat actor could easily infect one of those documents and now have a foothold for at least for reconnaissance in an organization. You mentioned sort of the threat actors that are trying to sort of do poisoning of models. There's also accidental bias. We've seen, for example, machine learning models use, I know Amazon had to turn off one of theirs that was being used in hiring decisions, for example, because there was bias built in. There's facial recognition models that have bias built in, cultural bias built in, because the data model training set just didn't happen to be culturally diverse enough. So, there's accidental bias in machine learning models as well. That has to be a sort of a cognizant piece of everybody's thought process here. And then, we talk a lot about insider risk management, right? Insider risk doesn't necessarily mean, Joe in accounting is on his last day downloading all the financials so he can sell them to the highest bidder. Insider risk could mean somebody just doing something accidentally or mistakenly within the organization, and being able to see, is what they're doing safe, not safe, outside the norm, inside the norm? How do you manage and message that, and how do you address it in real time? So yeah, I think that those are all really important things to keep in mind.
I see. Oh, go ahead, Melissa.
I was going to say, before we get to Brian's question, that for me, that really brought up a personal question that I have. You talk about how there's accidental bias with, artificial intelligence and machine learning. Do you think that, there's this general argument that artificial intelligence could potentially take over jobs and take over roles? Do you think it'll ever get to a point where artificial intelligence or machine learning can completely do the job on its own? Or do you think inherently, because there's bias and because it's, a program, that's just not possible?
Well, we could probably have an entire hour webinar on that, which is a great topic. Yeah, let's do it next week. All right. So, well, I think generally AI or machine learning models right now tend to be somewhat singularly focused. So they're focused on solving a problem, doing a good job, hopefully, of solving a problem, but a problem. Yes, there's been a lot of work, and Microsoft has, for example, on some of the cognitive text analytics or some of the computer vision models and stuff like that. Again, they're trying to be a little broader, but they're still solving a problem or a small group of problems that are related to each other. So do I see a time, in the next maybe 5 years where they're just replacing people's jobs writ large? Probably not. But I think very focused and scoped things that are better suited for machines, like looking at 8 trillion signals a day, that's a better purpose for a machine anyway, right? There are some jobs that just, aren't great for humans to do. They're just mindless jobs where you might be prone to errors. A machine's going to do a better job at that. So I think the better question isn't, are machines replacing humans or are machine learning models replacing human jobs? It's, what are the right jobs for machine learning models to take, and where are the right places for humans to supplement that, to add sort of that cognitive element of, does this make sense, or is this normal, after the machine has maybe separated, 8 trillion signals into something manageable.
Right. Okay, thanks, Jeff. Okay, we'll get to Brian's question. COVID also caused a rush to do things. So how do we balance between the rush to get something done versus getting the security right to start? AI models need to be trained, causing slowdowns as well. Mike, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sorry, hit mute. The first thing I would say to that is security is never a rush. You never want to be in a sprint for security. Sprinting to the finish line for security, you're going to turn off services you don't want to. So always want to caution that. However, to his point of, the rush of, okay, we have to make all of these services live over the weekend because all of our employees are going home and we can't access the on-premise server. There's a process, and organizations, I think, have to be willing to accept that process and understand that slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? You don't want to rush into a SharePoint move or a OneDrive move just because you think you have to be back to work first thing Monday morning. I'm not saying you don't, but I'm saying there's a way to go about it, and you filter out the important versus the I can do this next week. Yeah,
absolutely. Jeff, Phil, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I know where Brian's coming from. We work with a lot of clients that because of COVID and what that did when initially the onset kind of came on with it, we're kind of forced to move to Teams, to move to a cloud-based service, to kind of do things that would have normally taken maybe 9 or 12 months even. They did it over the course of a few weeks, right? So they did it to try to keep in business running and operational and that kind of stuff. I would say that even if you've done that, there's never a bad time to go back and revisit your cybersecurity posture, your strategy. That should be done on an ongoing basis anyway. So if you're caught in a position where you did have to do that, no time like the present to go back and take a look. Do we enable MFA the right way? We're working with conditional access. Are we protecting the endpoints the way we should? Are we doing all those things that, again, given the right amount of time and strategy, we would have done? So I would say you can always go back and take a look at that stuff. And if you've been caught like in that kind of position that Brian, I think, was referencing.
Yeah, and I'll just add really quickly that while Brian's question was sort of focused on the security aspect, which is obviously a critically important thing to consider from the moment of any technology conversation, any business conversation, there's also sort of the reconciliation of, okay, now here we are as an organization, and maybe we did things in a bit of a rush, 18 months ago. How do we now add governance and lifecycle management and controls? And it's never a bad time to add additional, governance to a process, or add an approval to something that maybe you had democratized a bit early on, right? So if you rolled out teams in a way that said, all right, we're going to put some security controls in place, and maybe that means that in order to be effective, we're letting people create their own teams, just so they can start getting back to work quickly with their small groups. Okay, that is a fair statement, right? We had MFA in place. We felt like we were strongly authenticating their identity, but we allowed them to create some teams. I get it, right? We all tried to do what we thought was right, 18 months ago. Well, now you're faced with an organization 18 months later that has team sprawl. I'm using Teams as an example, but extrapolate that out to really any tool within an organization where you democratize something, great. And now you're at this place where, oh my gosh, how do I get my arms back around it? How do I get some governance back around it? How do I do lifecycle management around this? How do I get approval controls in place? So there's a lot that's not just on the security side, because security, and I think Stephen mentioned this in the chat, security isn't just a one-time thing. It's a continual evaluation of posture. But there's also the governance side, which is adjacent to security. And there's the sort of approvals and workflow side, which is adjacent to security, right? But some of it touches more on workflow and automation and organizational posture and all that kind of stuff. So it is a large conversation to have. No organization should feel like they have all the answers, but they should avail themselves of great resources out there. And, there are companies that are trying to make approvals better and lifecycle management better and workflow better and automation better. Those tools exist, and they do have good security governance models around them too.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Jeff. It looks like we don't have any other last minute questions, so I'm going to go ahead and just close this out. Thank you so much to the presenters today, Jeff, Mike, Phil, and thank you to everyone who attended the cybersecurity webinar this month. I know I can speak for all of us when I say it is so great having you here. We appreciate your attendance. And we're just grateful to have these monthly webinars now where we can have this space to connect with you. Next month, we are going to be diving into the modern workplace. So we're really excited about that. Stay tuned for just some more details and information on that. We'll definitely send out an email. But in the meantime, we do appreciate you being here. And yeah, I hope you guys have a lovely day.